Hello, church family. This is Pastor Jeff, and I'm here to bring you a Good Friday message on persecution. How do you like that? Well, we're going to talk about Jesus being persecuted on the cross from the Jewish leaders, and we're going to unpack this. Now, this seems like more like an Easter message. How does it fit into the series in times like these? Well, here's how it fits in. In times like these is a series that Pastor Andrew and I are doing to talk about how to handle difficult times, whether that be personal, like grief, trials, a loss, or whether it be more communal and global, like pandemics, whether it be wars, whether it be tragedies, fires, whether it be economic failures, whether it be persecution. These are all difficult times. So the series we're kind of going through great controversy, looking at different topics. In fact, today's topic is from chapter 2 of Great Controversy, persecution of the early church. I didn't want to go through the early church. Good Friday, I wanted to focus more on Jesus. And I'm actually really excited about this, giving this talk. It's really forced me to clarify and verbalize my position on persecution. And I really think this is the most beautiful picture of persecution, if you can say it that way. For me, it really clarifies what I'm aiming at. I want to be blessed by God. And one of the blessings in the Bible is that you're persecuted for righteousness' sake. So if I can somehow figure out how to live a righteous life like Jesus did and be persecuted like Jesus did, somehow that's going to be a blessing to me and it's going to be a blessing to you. And you may say, Lord, oh my, do not bless me. But it's a blessing. And I think we really need to understand it. And I think being Good Friday, the story of Jesus on the cross is going to showcase this for us. So I want to split this talk into two parts. Talk one, what does it mean? Why does persecution invoke a response, and from whom? In the second part, I want to talk more about what it means to be righteous. Okay. What does it mean to be persecuted for righteousness' sake? How is that a blessing? Okay, well, it's a blessing because if you live your life so righteously like Jesus, that the world is prompted and compelled to invoke a response of hostility to you, because somehow you're threatening their worldly control, man, that's incredible. That's phenomenal. I mean, that's a warrior for Jesus. That's something else. And I tell you, you're blessed because it solidifies your walk with God. You know, so many people in this world don't have a deep core principle of value. They don't have God to live for, and they go all over the place. And that's no way to live a life. You got to have the right foundation to base your life on, and God's that. And if you got that so figured out that you're persecuted for it, man, that's just going to solidify that concept, that walk with God. Secondly, I really think that persecution for righteousness' sake, you're blessed because it shows you're close to God. Now, I really want to just clarify something here. I think a lot of people can easily confuse persecution, and they can be doing normal things and think that they're somehow close to God. Like, for example, you're being persecuted, but not for righteousness' sake. If you're part of a immigrant minority that's coming to a new land where the majority is threatened by your presence, that's just racism. That's just common human behavior. It's not because you're living a pure life that they're upset about your presence. Okay. If you're a Christian student whose atheistic professor gives you an F on your paper, well, maybe you did a crummy job. Maybe it's not because you're this pure, threat to him. Maybe it's just because you did a bad job. Okay. Just because you're treated poorly doesn't mean you're persecuted for righteousness' sake. And I think it's also important. I think a lot of people kind of make a stink about things, and it's really their own weird concepts, their own weird ideas leading them, and no one likes it, and so they think they're being persecuted. And that's not it. That's not what Jesus is talking about. It's very specific. So let me ask you this. How does Jesus' death on the cross show elaborate this concept of persecution? Well, the two things that we know about Jesus on the cross, number one, we know that he was innocent, he was pure, definitely was not a wicked criminal, and that just showcased throughout. I mean, they had to have multiple witnesses who couldn't agree on their testimony against Jesus. They had to use his own testimony. He was so pure, so obvious. It really was hard for the Jewish leaders to convince Pilate and Herod to convict him. But they were determined. And that's the second point. The second point of the gospel of Jesus' life is that persecution happens from religious leaders. The Jewish religious leaders could not stand Jesus taking their control of the people away from them. That's very strong in the Gospels. In fact, Jesus even told the disciples, "Hey, we're going to go to Jerusalem. It's going to be the religious leaders and the scribes who are going to hand me over to the Gentiles to be scourged and crucified, and just know that that's coming." And that's absolutely something about religious persecution, is it comes from religious leaders. And when I say religious leaders, I don't want to confine that just to Christians and Muslims and Buddhists. I think that applies to communism. I think it applies to atheism, because any worldview that has to interpret reality so that its followers live a certain way for the benefit of the leaders is a religion. And it's not a religion in the sense of there's a God to worship, but it's a worldview. It's a philosophy that guides someone on how to live the way. It gives them a way. And believe me, the narratives of the world, the philosophies of the world are competing for the hearts of men and the minds of people. And so the religious leaders they had a way of living life, and it was the Jewish way, and they were really blessed by it in the sense that they made a lot of money off of it. And Jesus had these theological arguments and just showed how stupid they were. And not that Jesus was demeaning to them, but he showed how shallow their approach to the Bible was, and it undermined their authority and it undermined their control of the people, and they could not handle it. And so you could say, well, Pastor, well, that makes sense. I mean, anytime you threaten some controlling person's control of others, they don't like it and they are hostile. Yes, absolutely. But you could say that business leaders, CEOs, I mean, they're threatened when someone else comes up and vies and competes for their position. Is that religious persecution? No, it's not. So is there something more to the threat that the religious leaders had from Jesus? And it was, absolutely it was. It was because Jesus was righteous. He was pure. For a moment, think back to the story of Cain and Abel. Cain's religious. He has an approach to life. He's going to get blessed by God, given those sacrifices. So he brings his fruit, and he does it. And what? No response from God? And wait a moment, he looks over there, and there's Abel, and Abel's presenting sheep, and he's getting the blessing of God. His sacrifice is accepted. Now, Cain basically realized this is where it's religious. Cain looks at Abel and goes, this guy has God figured out. Like, he knows how to get close to God. Now, Cain could have said, Abel, can you show me what you're doing? Because I really want to learn how to be closer to God. And some of the priests did that with Jesus. Some of the priests, like Nicodemus, came to Jesus and said, Rabbi, you have the truth. Teach me. But Cain doesn't go that route. Cain goes the route of Caiaphas. And Cain says, I can't handle this guy closer to God, having life figured out more than me. I'm taking him down. And so Cain kills Abel. And that's exactly what the religious leaders do. They kill Jesus. They kill the guy who could have shown them how to be closer to God, because they'd rather believe a lie about reality that left them in charge than to be humble with a new understanding of life that showed them how to be closer to God. I mean, you think about that for a moment. It was absolutely religious in nature, in the sense that their approach to life was being shown as a second-rate approach to life. and they were incredibly threatened, and they pulled out all the stops. In fact, if you remember in the story, the religious leaders came before the cross with Jesus nailed, and they looked up and they said, hey, he saved others, himself he cannot save. And what were they trying to make a point out of? What were they trying to say? They're trying to say to the people, hey, look, that guy that healed you, that fed you, and blessed you and forgave you, look at him. Like, he's a loser. He's an utter failure. He can't do anything. He can't even save himself. How is he going to save you? Okay, so obviously this Jesus Messiah way, stop it. Just come back to us Jewish leaders and remember who's in charge. So just like Cain wanted to demolish Abel's sacrifice and to show that he had the better way of approaching life, and he couldn't handle it, and same with Jewish leaders. So it's very much persecution for righteousness is when you live a pure life to the point that it shows other worldviews and other philosophies of life as second rate and no longer effective, and you threaten the control of people, and it shows that they are fundamentally, spiritually lower class. Now, let me move on to my second big topic here, and that is, what does it mean to be righteous? What aspect of righteousness upsets false religious leaders? There's two things that do. Number one is truth-telling. And number two, it's people-loving. Truth-telling. Jesus comes and John says, hey, this is the word. And no man spake like this man. He speaks the truth. He will not let the rabbis influence him. He will not let the tricky lawyers befuddle him. He always says what's true. He says it with tact and he says it with love, but he always says what's true, and there's a conviction, there's a power to it that the Pharisees just didn't have. He tells the truth so consistently that even in the court where he's being prosecuted, he has an opportunity to be silent, and the case against him would fall apart. But he speaks up and says the truth. You will see the Son of Man. I am the Son of God, and you will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. And then later on, when Pilate makes a big deal, and Jesus says, well, hey, here's the truth. You have no power. You don't tell the judge who's going to sentence you to death, you got no juice. You got no umph. You flatter him, but Jesus always spoke the truth. And there's something incredibly righteous about being committed to the truth. There's, the story of the little boy who called out in the parade, look, Mom, the emperor has no clothes. Everybody else was, joining in the lie that the emperor had clothes. But one boy who told the truth made everyone realize how foolish it was to pretend. And that's exactly what truth tellers do. I mean, truth tellers have a power. It's exponentially strong. 1 against a million is no match for the one if he tells the truth. Because the million recognize, they know in their hearts he's telling the truth. And there's a conviction there. Peter Hitchens talks about in communism, the Rage Against God, he talks about how the communist leaders could not handle Christianity. They had to be an atheistic state because Christianity had a competing worldview. And, of course, they had a lot of persecution of Christians. And there's a story of a communist named Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who, even though he was an atheist, he was a communist, he got on the wrong side of the leaders, he was sent to these gulag camps, and there he met Christians. And there's everybody else was bitter, everybody else was suffering and being tortured, and they were angry. And here are these Christians who were kind and they were truthful. These Christians would rather experience torture to their bodies than desolation of their soul. They knew that if they spoke truth, they spoke falsehood and lies against God, that would be a worse state of being than to have their body mangled and destroyed. That's why the Bible says, anyone, don't, he who denies me, right? God says, I'll deny you to the Father, because there's something soul destructive when you deny reality, when you deny the truth, when you're convicted about God and you deny that. Like that's soul crushing. So the story of Alexander Solzhenitsyn is that I'm not saying his last name right, I know, but he becomes convicted that he's going to tell the truth. And so he starts realizing all the times he lied. He realized how he basically kind of flowed with the communist culture. And even though all the times he lied about how great communism was, even though he knew it wasn't. In fact, it was a crime to complain about the hardships of life under a communist government. And he went along with it. And so he made a commitment from the testimony of these Christian witnesses that he would always tell the truth. And if he didn't know what was true, if he knew it was a lie, he wouldn't say it. And so that's exactly what he did. And he actually wrote this book about the truth behind communism. And he wrote all the facts of the war crimes and the sins of the leadership and the falsehood of the philosophy. And his books, published I think in the 1970s, was the death knell of communism in the intellectual world. Like nobody intellectual could after reading his books, could somehow think that communism was a good system. And that was part of the fall of communism. And it was because he met people who told the truth and it inspired him to tell the truth. See, when people tell the truth, you're dealing with reality. But if you're willing to lie, and pretend like reality is something that it isn't, then how do you fix that? There's a reason that America, with its commitment to freedom of speech, is one of the greatest nations in the world. Because if we all are committed to free speech, we can tell the truth. And when we tell the truth, something responds in other people that go, yeah, you're right. Now we all have a picture of reality and we can work with reality and we can move forward in life. We can solve problems. But if we're all lying about what the real problems are and we won't admit it, there's no forward progress. There's no dealing with problems. And Jesus comes along and he says, yeah, you guys got lots of problems. I'm telling you guys are wolves in sheep clothing. You're like tombs. You look good on the outside, but inside you got putrid flesh decaying. And, you guys devour widows' homes. Like the people, your parasites, living off of their credulity. And they couldn't stand it. And the people were starting like, yeah, he's speaking the truth. Yeah, you can't hate the Romans. You got to love your enemies. And, you got to stop lusting. And you got to start, let your yea be yea, your nay be nay. And be a light. I mean, just all these powerful truths that everybody go, yeah. That's right. And so if you tell the truth, that is absolutely a key part of being righteous to the point that you'll be persecuted for it. The second part is being people loving. People loving. Boy, you can't help but admit Jesus loved the people. You can't help but see he cared about them. He wasn't trying to keep them dependent on him so he could make money off of them, so he could feel good about himself. He went to the cross. I mean, talk about feeling bad about yourself. He went to the cross for them. Jesus was someone who wanted people to grow up in truth and into the image of God. He said, hey, God, he's a father. Call him Father. Call him Abba. You're his child. Grow into his image. Like that's Jesus' approach to people. Like he wanted the best for them. And he would feed them, and he would heal them, and he would forgive them, but he would tell them the truth. All because he's trying to help them grow up. And I think that if you're going to be someone who's persecuted for righteousness' sake, it's going to be because you help people become independent of the controlling forces in their life. Man, I can tell you as a pastor, in the past, I've helped wives who were being abused by their husbands. And I'm telling you, their husbands were not happy about it. A friend of mine did it. He was even more gifted at it than I was. And Yeah, he had his life threatened because people that lose control are not happy about it. And there's something about when you stand up for people and you want the best for them, that the powers that be can't handle it. When you want to bless people and you show them a better way of life, the old system that crumbles is going to persecute you. You know, in the last chapter or last book of the Bible, it says that blessed, it says, here are they that keep the commandments of God and they have the faith of Jesus. And I want you to think about that for a moment. When you keep the commandments of God, you're blessed. And you show that life is better lived when you keep God's commands. Healthier body, better financial situation because you're not in debt. You have relationships, meaningful relationships with family because you know what? You love them, you tell the truth, you live for others, you're not selfish. You're faithful, you're pure. You worship God, you gain strength from God. I mean, all the commandments are life-giving. And what did the Jewish leaders want to show the people that Jesus was? An utter failure. And in the end times, the world's powers will want to show God's people as utter failures. And they'll attack God's people on the issue of the commandments. Stop promoting commandment keeping. Because commandment keeping helps people mature and grow into the image of God. It's not a works thing. It's a maturing thing. It's a better life thing. And when God's people, and by the way, I'll throw this in, the Sabbath is not just about keeping the right day. The Sabbath in Isaiah 58 is about helping struggling people in their difficulties, whether they're in prison, whether they're hungry, whether they're poor, whether they're oppressed. It's about the manservant, your maidservant, and anybody within your influence, your circle, helping them find rest in their life from following God. Like, this is a big package. And I really think that in the last days, the persecution that happens is because God's people tell the truth, committed to the truth, and they're committed to loving people and helping people grow into the image of God. If we did those two powerfully, persecution would arise again, and we would be blessed for it. Will that happen? Well, I think we have to do a lot of soul searching and ask ourselves, how much do we love people? How much do we love the truth? I really think that that's the crux of the matter. And I really think that we're going to find that we're not as pure and innocent and righteous as we had thought we were and wished we were. That we're a whole lot more willing to go with the crowd. We're a whole lot willing to bend reality to make ourselves look good. That we want honor and respect, but we don't always care about people. Anyway, Lord bless you. I hope this was instructional, and I hope it expanded your concept of being persecuted for righteousness' sake.